Hello, welcome to the Science Fiction and Fantasy Marketing Podcast, the show where we help you establish your author brand, increase the size of your audience, and sell more books. I'm Lindsay Baroker, and I'm here with my co-hosts.
I'm Jeff Poole.
And I'm Joe Lallo.
All right, and we have a return guest for you this week, the very lovely KM Shay. That's what she writes under. She tells me her name's Kitty, so we'll call her that on the show today. But you may remember she was on a little over a year ago where we talked about how she was just really rocking it and doing retold fairy tales and how she was doing with Kindle Unlimited. And she's really been up to a lot this last year, tinkering with advertising, hiring a personal assistant, and getting involved with some joint author promotions. So we're going to ask her all about that, as well as how she's branched over into the King Arthur fantasy genre. So hi, Kitty. Welcome to the show.
Hello. Thanks for having me back. I'm super excited to be here again.
Right, well, we're glad to have you. It's always really fun to find somebody that's kind of found a subgenre that's not the one you think of with like, oh, they make tons of money. I mean, who doesn't buy urban fantasy, right?
Yeah.
Well,
it's fun to be in a small genre too.
Yeah.
So.
All right. Well, why don't you tell us kind of what you've been up to since we talked to you? I guess I looked, it was about April of 2016, so a little over a year ago.
Mm-hmm. Last year was kind of more like my business years, is what I would call it. I only ended up writing 3 books last year, which is very small amount for me because the previous year I'd written 7. But I spent that time doing a lot of different stuff. I tried doing editing some of my older projects. I ended up doing a bunch of promotions with different authors. I tinkered a lot like with keywords and got new covers. And I was basically taking like all the advice that they give you with a lot of the different indie publishing books, where it talks about like fixing your keywords so they're for your market and making your cover more to market and that kind of thing. So it's definitely more of like a business focused year.
And well, I'm going to ask because I think a lot of people wonder, like, once you've got like lots of books out, should you just keep pumping more out, or should you do that and kind of like you've got all these products and go make sure they're actually selling the best they can? How did that go for you?
Well, before I get into that, I should kind of put it as a little caveat. I feel like when you're deciding on if you want to do that or not, you need to sort of sit down and decide like what kind of business model you're going to follow. So for me, sitting down and pumping out books absolutely works the best. Like nothing else had the return on investment as my butt in my chair writing a new book. And I should say, and interacting with my community just on a regular basis. But for other people, I know the advertising really does work. So I do want to say, don't be dissuaded by my stories, because if you look at like what you write and the kind of thing that you want to do, it might be completely different from mine. So just because it doesn't work for me doesn't mean it won't work for you.
That's a good point. I've got a dog trying to get up into the banquette over here. If you hear some scratching noises, he's got to make sure he's in every show some way or another. But and I would say too with that, it kind of depends. Like maybe a lot of people write 20 books or more, and don't really have anything take off. So that might be a really good time to try to retool things and see if you can try the advertising and make it work. If you've already had like a series that maybe you've had 3 book pubs on book 1 and it's done well, and now it's on the downhill side because you're working on something else, then that might be, it may make more sense then to just write something new. That's kind of my experience and my tactics too. Not that I'm not trying to get some new covers, and I've replaced a few already, but I think you mentioned that you re-edited some of your stories. Did you find that, because I think a lot of people think that about their first books, maybe I should go back, they weren't the strongest. How did you find that experience?
It was a mistake. I'll be honest. So I ended up redoing, I think, like 3 or 4 books last year, and they were deep edits. And that was the biggest reason why I only got 3 books written, is because I just poured weeks into these rewrites. And it was mostly my Timeless Fairy Tale series, which I did a major rehaul of Beauty and the Beast, which is book 1. And I'd done that because I was really concerned that the book wasn't up to my current level. And that one, perhaps it was a good business move to do that just because it is the lead in. But to be honest, it didn't really make a difference. My readers knew what I was doing because they were basically like, why aren't you writing more books? I mean, this time last year we had like 4 books out by now. What's going on? So I'd explain to them. So then, of course, they all wanted the new version. So then I spent a long time in addition to doing the actual edits, also talking to Amazon and trying to get them push the books through. And then, of course, it doesn't work for everyone. So then I had to create like a little guide to help my readers be able to get the newest copy. And then once they did have it, about 90% of them were like, I don't know what you changed. I don't see it at all. And there were a couple people who were disappointed too with the changes a lot because that one is also probably my most popular fairy tale. So it for sure didn't do anything for my readers. And I didn't see a change at all in the amount of like downloads and page reads it was getting. When I changed its cover, that had more of an impact. But so that was just for Beauty and the Beast, the first one. All the other books I did, it was like even less of a thing. Like it was really difficult just to get the changes through. And then, like I mentioned, I was spending so much time doing these edits. And the unexpected downside of all this was I know last week you guys mentioned imposter syndrome. Uh, Doing those edits gave me like, I had imposter syndrome before, but after that, it was awful. It was getting to the point where people would be like, oh, I love these like early books of yours. And I'd be like, I am so sorry. I am so sorry. And they'd be like, why are you apologizing? And it'd just be because I'd feel so bad about like the quality of my writing when people actually did love it. So I ended up learning it was just best to leave well enough alone, particularly because hopefully in another year or two I'll be even better. And I don't want to be spending all of this time redoing my catalog every 5 years. It's just not worth it.
All right, that's good. Probably good advice for people who are out there thinking of doing the same thing. Your camera popped up, and we're looking at your ceiling
Oh,
now. Just for our 7 people on
oh, it
YouTube. But
switched cameras. Yikes. I'm sorry.
oh, that's okay. Jeff just wasn't sure about your smoke detector and if it was legit. So,
Oh, yes, my dog lets me know. Oh, okay. There we go. It
all
was
right,
not. Oh, so much
no
fun
problem.
tonight with technology.
Well, let me ask. You've done a bunch of the fairy tales, and I think you were doing the King Arthur even before we had you on the show. But it sounds like it looked like you had more new releases in that. Could you talk about like maybe why you jumped into that genre and how it's been going?
Sure. I actually finished the series. I started writing it before I started writing my fairy tales, and they were actually the first books that did well. And then after I had written book 2 of that, I had already started Beauty and the Beast. So I thought, okay, I'll release Beauty and the Beast, and then I'll go back and I'll write book 3 in this King Arthur series. And Beauty and the Beast just took off, so it didn't really make financial sense to do that. King Arthur, I did purposely as more of an experiment because if you look at the King Arthur legends, they're very short and more like episodes. So they're not really congruent for making like super long books with one overarching plot. You're better off just doing like short little episodes because that's what they were. They were, like these ballads kind of thing. So I did them as 99 cents, and I was just trying to do the short little episode thing. But then, like I mentioned, Timeless Fairy Tales took off. However, the King Arthur series ended up cultivating this group of followers who were extremely resilient and extremely loyal. And so they would constantly be emailing me and being like, when's the next one coming out? So even though the Timeless Fairy Tales were doing better, I still continued to write the King Arthur books. Also just because I really love King Arthur. Like that's been something that I've loved the entire, like, since I was a kid. So I ended up then deciding, I was going to originally have 3.99 cent books left, but I knew from the experiment that it's better to write the longer books and charge 2.99 or 3.99 than the short 99 cent ones. That 70% royalty makes a huge difference, even though I did put like the first 3 in a 3-pack. So I ended up deciding I'll write the last 3 in one book and finish the series because these people deserve an ending. The King Arthur niche is definitely one where people really enjoy it and they're really loyal and passionate, and you'll get some amazing readers in there. But it is smaller. The fairy tale genre is definitely bigger. There are other niches that are what I would call more hungry too. But if you're perhaps trying to build a fan base, it's not a bad place to start because, like I mentioned, they really are supremely loyal and they will stick with you for years. So,
Yeah, that's awesome. And that's kind of what I would guess too, that the fairy tales, there's been so many movies and retellings. Everybody knows the fairy tales and a lot of people enjoy them. But King Arthur, I don't know. I think a lot of fantasy people also read those, find them at some point when they're reading their Dungeons and Dragons and Forgotten Realms. That was probably when I picked them up. But it's
yeah.
good to know. And in the last year or so, have you seen, like, since we talked about it on the show, like, oh, fairy tale genre is not very competitive right now. Have you seen more people come into it, or do you think with both those subgenres that there's still like a good place to start for maybe a newer writer who's just trying to find any way to make a top 100 somewhere on Amazon and maybe get some free advertising that way?
It's kind of a tricky question. Normally, I'd say Arthur is absolutely like a good section to start with. However, in the ebook section, Harry Potter is now throwing off the ranks because somehow it got added to the King Arthur section. I don't really understand why, and it's completely confusing because like so my King Arthur books when I launched my last one, it was number 1 in the entire bookstore, but in the ebook store, like in the King Arthur section, but then the ebook store it was not because that Harry Potter books were in there for ebooks, but not for normal books. So I don't know. It's kind of like touch and go with that for now. You could still easily land on the top 100 for sure, but getting on like that top 20 list might be a little harder because of the rigmarole with Harry Potter. The fairy tale genre is definitely, there's a lot more people who have entered it, but they are also a super hungry genre, just like, I mean, in terms of people who are looking for those kinds of books. About 2 weeks ago, I ended up posting on my website that was just asking for like fairy tale recommendations. And it's been one of like the biggest blog posts I've ever written on my website. It's got over 60 comments. And so people are very hungry for them, particularly as long as Disney is releasing these revamps of all of them. But it will be harder to get to the top because there is more competition. But you've got a lot more going for you too, though, because if you use Beauty and the Beast in your title, or like for Snow White, if you use like, I don't know, like there's another series called like Snow and Ashes or something, and it's very obviously a Snow White take. So as long as your title has something fairy tale in it, the people will find you. It's just far easier for them to find you. So that is one of the pros of the fairy tale niche.
Yeah, and there aren't many genres where people can title a story and people are like searching for it even though they don't know your book exists. I wish, right?
Yeah.
All right, we
Yeah.
had a
Well, sorry, I'll just add real quick
oh
too. It
yeah,
also is a help with like advertising because people are a lot more likely, I feel, to like be scrolling through the free books and be like, oh, a Beauty and the Beast retelling versus like, I don't know, like some kind of like one of my other titles is called Life Reader. And then no, they're not gonna stop and look at that one. They're gonna look at Beauty and the Beast because they recognize it and they have like associations with it already.
yeah, that's definitely useful. Everything else, people have to like read the blurb first and find the cover attractive and click on it and be interested. So it's less of a sell, I'm sure.
Yeah.
All right, Jeff has a question from the YouTube watchers.
Alrighty, I have a question from Inez Johnson. She says, please consider asking KM this question. Do you find that your audience for your Arthurian books are mostly males or females since you have a female protagonist?
It is mostly females, but that is also the only series where I get emails from dads that say they read it with their sons or they read it with their daughters. So I do get more male readers, I'd say, than I do with my fairy tales. But predominantly, it's still a female crowd reading them.
All right, thank you very much. Inez, I hope that answers your question.
All right. Well, we're going to jump into kind of asking you about hiring a personal assistant before later. For those who are wondering, we'll ask you a bit about the joint author promos, and you mentioned advertising. And in your email, you said had done a Facebook Live event that actually was useful, which is not how I feel about those things. So we got some more questions on that. But as far as personal assistant, what made you to decide to hire one, and how did you go about finding someone?
I decided to hire one because I was really close to losing it. I mean, that sounds like an exaggeration, but I was dying. again, as like kind of a preface, my business model is for sure writing a lot of books, but then also connecting personally with my readers. I don't really, even now, I still don't do advertisements. I know we'll talk about that later, but they basically don't work for me. So I just concentrate on my readers. So part of that, though, is I have to try balancing writing books with talking to my readers, interacting on Facebook, getting my newsletter out. And I try to make everything more personal because they do know me. So it basically got to the point where I couldn't do all the business stuff and all the writing stuff and all the communication stuff. And this actually reached the point shortly after I talked to you guys last year. But it just took me forever to find the right kind of person. Initially, when I was looking for someone, I started online. I tried talking to other authors who I knew had them, had assistants, and I looked on like online websites for people who worked full time as an assistant. But I actually ended up hiring someone I know in real life, and she has a bit of an unusual background too for an assistant. Do you want me to go into it, or should I wait for another question?
Oh, you're go for it. I'm really curious about this stuff because, as listeners know, I've been saying I need to do this for years and to handle my email. And then people email me and offer like, "Oh, I know somebody." I'm like, "Wait, but you emailed me. That's the thing I'm way behind on." And so maybe in 3 months you'll get an answer, I hope. But no, please tell me.
Yeah, so Meg, that's her name. I call her Rockstar Meg because she helps me so much. Meg actually has a degree in engineering and in business. She has no background in the publishing industry or no interest in writing, and she's worked for years for manufacturing corporations, which that is actually really important because before I was a full-time writer, I worked as a freelance reporter and then as a circulation member of a library. Well, those were really fun jobs. I basically had no idea not only how like a business worked or operated, but even how to organize my email inbox. So like, and I seriously looked for books that's like email organization for dummies. They don't exist, which I think it's because everybody is like, well, what kind of an idiot doesn't know how to do that? That'd be me. So I knew when I was looking for an assistant that I was hiring for very specific holes that I have in my background. And like I said, part of it was email. Another part of it was actually Excel capabilities. One of the things I do just to kind of help with advertising and keeping an eye on all my books is I get, well, and now Meg does this. So Meg goes in every week and she pulls each individual titles, their rankings on the store, but also their KU pages read, as well as the total number of books sold. And she does this for every single series, every single title. And then she'll also do like an author ranking. And so we have, I don't know, 3 years of data. It goes back basically all the way to when I launched Beauty and the Beast. And that information makes a huge difference in calculating like return on investment, which side note, I didn't know what that was until Meg joined me. She was the one who was like, oh yeah, because I was like, is this worth it? And she's like, oh, you want to know your ROI? Sure. And so she was the one who figured that out. So that's why even though she's an engineer and a business person and kind of an unusual choice as an assistant, she's exactly what I need because that would take me 2 hours to pull that information off of my Amazon KDP board. She does it in less than 20 minutes. So it's an excellent return on investment for me, like paying her because I get so much time back. But now, in addition to that, she's also starting to take over my emails. She did get it all organized. It took her about 2 weeks. She was absolutely horrified when she first got in there. And she's starting to respond to basic questions because I get a lot of endlessly like repeated questions like, is the King Arthur series really over? And the answer is yes, it is. But I agonize over my emails because, like I said, I am really close with my readers. So if someone just asks me that question and that's it, I'll still be there for like 10 minutes being like, oh, was I friendly enough in this email? Was I, like thankful enough, blah, 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 versus like Megan will take like 30 seconds and be like, yes, it's really over. Thank you. Bye. So she also brought me a lot of time back in that area too. So it was an excellent, excellent investment. But before anyone looks into hiring an assistant, I think you really need to make a list of what you're either bad at or what takes you too long, and then hire specifically for that. And you can look both offline and online. Because like I said, Meg I know in real life, which is great because she has all my passwords and stuff, so I really have to trust her. But yeah.
Yeah, I've talked about email being my thing. Organization, what I have folders over on the side, that's organized. And it's, something I think maybe people don't realize when you do start to get more fans and more people subscribing to your list. And if you start publishing a lot, every time you send a newsletter, you're going to get a pile of email back. And it's like, I love hearing from the readers, and it's really encouraging. 1 in 10 might say something like, why the hell aren't you writing fantasy? When are you going to go away with all this sci-fi crap? But it's like you want to hear from them, but at the same time now, every time I send out a newsletter, I'm like, oh man, I'm going to get like 4 hours of work because I have to answer all the emails that come back. So when somebody says, hey, will you plug my book? I'm like, no, not unless I love you and I'm also sending out a newsletter for one of my releases at the same time. Because yeah, so there's my problem. But I'm like you, and I want to personalize the emails. I try to like say something back that proves I read it, And
Yeah.
it seems really impersonal to hand off the email to someone else. Did you struggle with that at all?
Not really, because as part of like building, like since I have such a close fan base, I have since the get-go tried to make it very apparent that I'm not doing this alone. So all my editors have like I have two editors, they both have like nicknames. My cover artist has a nickname that she goes by on my website. Even my head beta reader, she like they all have nicknames. They all have like a little file, I guess you could say, on my website. So people know them. So that's why they were like, oh, this is just another person being added to the team. And now we won't have to wait a whole month for our email to get answered. If they have a simple question, they know Meg will be all over that. So, and she's still like, if there's a super personal, like email, she definitely like hands it through to me. It's more just like the easy stuff that they could find on my website if they were looking at the correct areas, but for just one reason or another, they don't. So I did, like I said in the beginning, I did struggle with a little bit. But that's also then why when I brought Meg in, I did a blog post about it. We did like a getting to know you kind of thing. So I try to bring it in as a person adding to the team, and they know too that I my community I see as being like a part of my brand, and like they're a part of this too. So they're excited for me then, which is really nice.
All right, cool. Let me let the guys talk a little bit and ask some questions about this too, and then we'll ask a little more about the advertising and marketing stuff you've been doing.
Yep. All right. So, first question I'd have is like, how much work would you say is sufficient to justify a personal assistant? Like extra overflow.
Mm, if you are super anxious and super stressed and ready to pull out your hair, you're probably well past needing to hire one. And if you find that like you're wasting time on projects that just well, like for instance, when I mentioned that I was taking like 2 hours to do with that Excel stuff, ripping data and numbers off of my KDP board. So Meg got it down to 20 minutes, but that's 20 minutes now with like 4 or 5 extra books. So I'd be taking like at least 3, maybe 4 hours. So it gets to a point where if you are able to be an author full time, it's far better for you to be writing a book in those 4 hours than to be doing something you absolutely hate and you're not very good at.
That makes a lot of sense. And I guess it's like, well, what if you're the sort of person who like has busy periods? Like, let's say we talk a lot on the show about having a rapid launch schedule, and some people are going to achieve that by writing a lot of books and sort of banking them and then doing a series of releases. Would you say like it's feasible to get a personal assistant for like a 3-month chunk when you know you're going to be swamped, or is it the sort of thing you should really sort of expect to have ongoing work for?
I think you could, if you get the right person, you could probably do like the 3-month chunk. Um, Meg would actually probably prefer that for me, but I keep having like projects that it's like, well, if you finish that, you can do this. So I think people will start finding that there actually is like lots of stuff so they could keep an assistant hired the whole time. But I do know that just from looking to it, like the assistants that I saw online, like that had websites and stuff like that, they are usually pretty comfortable being fluid because you're not like you wouldn't be the only author that has just that one busy time. There are lots of other authors who are doing the same. So for them, it's just a matter of balancing their schedule. And a lot of author assistants who are available online usually want to be writers themselves too, so they are also trying to work on their own projects. So it's just a matter of making sure you're with the right person in order to do that.
Yeah, it seems like this is a situation where the specific need, like you were talking about, the specific needs that need to be filled are going to vary so much between people that it should be very clear up front. Not just like when you're searching for someone, but when you get them, be very clear the nature of their employment under you. You know.
Yeah, exactly.
It's funny because you were mentioning you basically learned the phrase return on investment. One of my questions that was, how would you measure the value or return on investment of hiring an assistant? Like, can it really come down to dollars and cents?
I'm sure my assistant Meg would be able to tell you, and she'd be able to give you a number. I cannot though, because I don't think like that. I can say, just knowing that she saved me those 2 extra hours every week on the data mining alone, like that is a lot. And that's just the beginning. Like, so now she's taking over other stuff that will continue to take me longer. Like 2 hours of my life back a week is, because what happened with me is I was just working insanely long days. So now it's like, oh, that's 2 hours. I could like go outside. So it's not even just like, a dollars and cents thing, which it will come down to that if you're struggling to write books. It's also like you can live life, which is important.
Yeah, that is a quality of life is a value that people tend, particularly when they're self-employed, they tend to completely throw away. And yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Like, I don't think that I'm at a level where I need an assistant, except for maybe a few weeks out of the year. But I could certainly see that the greatest improvement to my life would be knowing, well, that thing is being handled. I don't have to worry about that thing. And even if it turns out that at the end of the year I've spent a few extra dollars than I made, just knowing that I can get that off my chest would be probably the most valuable thing for me.
Yeah, well, and one thing too that a lot of authors don't really mention is that your health is a serious problem, and it's good to invest early on, because once like it takes a tanker, it's too late. So what happened to me last year is I ended up having some serious like eye strain problems. So there was also a couple of weeks and even months there where I really couldn't write because I'd be on the computer for half an hour and I'd just get headaches. And it was because I'd spent like the 4 months prior working from like sun up to sundown, and my eyes were just like, we're done. So you want to get help and try to slim things down before it gets to that point, or you'll be in a world of hurt.
Yeah, that happened to me in college. I was just talking to somebody earlier today. Like, I hit a certain point and I completely like just basically I'm sure I had a nervous breakdown. And you don't want that to occur. So yeah, I could again, the best return on investment is preventing a nervous breakdown.
Exactly. Yes.
All right. So well, by the way, nervous breakdowns aren't very good for productivity. So it comes down to dollars and cents there too.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. You will not be writing when you're having a nervous breakdown. Not going to happen.
All right, just one more question before I hand you off to Jeff. And this is sort of different for you because, again, you knew this person beforehand. But is there like a threshold of sensitivity and secrecy to the sort of tasks you'd be willing to give to an assistant? Like, obviously, you mentioned that she has all of your passwords. That was one of the things I was going to ask about. But like, even some people I know are very concerned about the details of their story getting out before the story is done. So like, could you conceivably be a situation where you'd be like doing non-disclosure agreements with someone?
I haven't had to do that because the people that I end up employing, I really, really trust. That being said, the first editor that came on board with me, she offered to do a non-disclosure agreement, which I know for a lot of the assistants, they do offer like contracts in order to like, save their butts and yours if something happens. So it's good to have written expectations. For me, it's not such a big issue with Meg because I can just walk over to her house and be like, hey, but if you're particularly if you're doing this online, because I've done other stuff like lawyer work and stuff online, you want to make sure that you do have some kind of contract just so your expectations are there and their expectations are there, and then you can slip in that non-disclosure clause, or I don't know the legal terms, unfortunately, but yeah, it is easy enough to get that in there too. But the other thing too is like Copyright is actually much stronger than most people think, so I'm not really that concerned about anybody running off with my stories. Also, because I know, like, if my readers found out, they would crucify whoever did that, and that is a very real, reality. A lot of the authors who their stuff ends up getting swiped by other authors, their readers are the ones who let them know. So it's kind of a risk, I guess you should say, you should be willing to take. But also, if you go with an assistant who's proven, like there are other authors who have used them and that kind of thing, then it's a lot more mentally reassuring to go with.
Yeah, that would be probably my greatest level of this would just be knowing that the person I have is familiar with the work and is trusted by people I trust. And
Hmm.
yeah, once I had that, I wouldn't really be too concerned about anything besides just the technicality of having something in writing. But
Yeah.
that's the only thing that's the last of my questions. So I'll hand you off to Jeff for a few more.
Okay.
Alrighty. My first question is something definitely along those same lines, is because I personally feel that hiring a personal assistant should be considered the holy grail for most indie authors. So my question to you is there anything you wish your assistant would do, but you just aren't comfortable teaching/training them to do it? For example, like me, you're a control freak.
Um, actually, Meg is extremely sensitive about that. So if there's like a strain in that way, usually it's her being like, I'm uncomfortable like doing this. That's why she actually started doing the data mining for me last year, but it wasn't until this year that I was able to talk her into coming on for more hours and doing like the email and stuff like that. So um, I guess you could say if you get the assistant who's right for you, they will hopefully also recognize their limitations. That can be tricky though, because I do know there's been a couple authors who have been burned, not because the assistant was like out like purposely trying to get them or anything, just because of ignorance. So, and since you're technically the boss, there will always be a responsibility that lies with you just to kind of check in and make sure that they're doing okay and that kind of thing. So, like Joe and I were talking about before about like the written contracts, I guess also just make sure that you have checkups into that, because that's usually when the problem occurs. At least that I've seen is when um the authors will like send their assistants to be loose to, I don't know, do marketing for like 2 3 months. They don't check in until like 4 or 5 months later, and by then the damage is already done. And like I said, it's not because the assistant is like out to get them, it's just because they were operating outside of their skill strength. So like I said, be very aware of the specific jobs you want them to do and then hire for that specific thing.
When I first asked that, you hesitated a little bit. I almost thought I was going to have to go, well, if there is, touch the side of your nose, and if there isn't, but I was going to ask you real quick too. Now that I thought about it, and I saw someone else was thinking about it too. You mentioned that you've been, you type on the computer a lot of times, your eyes are killing you, whatnot. When you're working on it for super long periods of time like that, do you wear like any special glasses? Do you have that special film you can put on your monitor that cuts down glare, that sort of thing?
I do. I'm not wearing them right now because it actually makes the light like reflect, but I have a pair of computer glasses that actually like reflect all blue light, which is what gives you the eye strain. So it's really nice. It helps a lot. But whenever I'm like looking around with like computer screens, I look like I'm a deer because they're shining all the time. So that's why I'm not wearing them right now. The other thing too, give me a second. The eye strain actually ended up being so bad that I had to go to like an eye rehab place. So I have like little exercises. This is like a little 3D exercise thing. But they said the biggest thing that you can actually do if you're looking to change your work habits to prevent eye strain is to look away every 15 minutes and try to look as far away as possible. So if you're situated by a window, that's ideal. Um, but the big thing is that you want to look out in sunlight. That's preferable, or at the very minimum 20 feet away. And doing that every like 15 to 30 minutes will help a lot with eye strain. And then also getting up every single hour, because there's something about like when you're sitting and sedentary,
Mhm.
your muscles will all start to stiffen up, and not just in your eyes, but like your entire body, and your eyes will take cues from that. So if you get up, get a snack or get some water or something like that, that will help a lot too.
Oh, I was going to say with regard to that too, is both my wife and I, we started doing this. She's wearing now one of those little Fitbit gizmos, and she gave me her Apple Watch there, and this damn thing says, "Hey, lard butt. It's time to get up and move around. I'm like, stupid thing. Fine. I make it happy, and then plus it gets me moving around a bit, so that kind of helps. But all right, okay. Next question I have for you. Now that you've gone through the process of getting a personal assistant, what would you say would be the 3 tasks you were the most relieved and grateful to give to your assistant?
The data thing was number one. I am so bad at Excel. That took so long, and I just hated every second I was doing it, especially because I didn't understand any of the numbers that I was getting. It was like, this means something, but I don't know what. So it was not a fun exercise. And then the email thing was definitely the big number two. Just knowing that there was someone else who would go through it, sift through it, because I was also struggling with a lot of guilt because it would take me a couple of weeks to get through all my email, particularly when I released a new book. It was getting to the point where I'd have to take off an entire month around a book release because just so many interactions were happening, and I was trying to update, like all my various pages and stuff like that. So it just wasn't worth the struggle. So I know you said 3, but those were really the 2 big things, and they were huge, so they count.
Okay, good deal. And my last question actually is a listener question from one of our live viewers there. And it's actually just take back a step about the Arthurian stuff. I'm going to read it as he typed it. So I wasn't too sure exactly what he meant by this, but I'm hoping that you do. Benjamin Douglas asks, or writes, what a cool take on Arthurian stuff. I'm curious, is there a gender identity queer bent to this at all? For example, does Brit identify what does he write? Heteronormatively and is forced to act as a male by external forces? Or is there an internal force urging her to identify that way? Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I think I know what they're getting at. And the answer is no. What ends up happening is the real King Arthur has run away with the shepherdess, and he was not at all interested in becoming the king. So Merlin, who's young and hot in my version, he ends up keeping the spell on the sword and the stone, and so it's like anyone in history who's worthy to become king, if they touch it, then they'll be sucked back to that time period. And so Brit, my 21st century American girl, she touches it and gets sucked through. And Merlin is basically like, well, you're not a dude, but we can just pretend you are. We'll hide your identity. It'll work. Congratulations, you're the new King Arthur. So that's basically what it is. It's a very, what I would call like simplified, straightforward version, because it mostly is about me kind of like poking fun at some of like the King Arthur legends and just some of the stuff that they did.
Very, very cool. For those that weren't intrigued by that series now, I'm sure they are by now, because I'm curious. But all right, that's it for my questions. Let me hand you over to Lindsay. We can get going on some of the advertising.
All right. I did have one more question I forgot to ask about personal assistants. Well, about your person specifically, she actually seems really overqualified based on the degrees you said she had compared to like what I see personal assistants and how much they get paid. How did you snag her, and is she working part-time or and still doing the other stuff?
Yeah, she's still just working part-time, and I'm sad to say she is exclusively my assistant. She's not looking at this point anyway to add on any other authors. And she is absolutely overqualified. But she also has like kind of an unusual um, background story too. She has a hobby farm. And so she wants to spend the majority of her time getting her hobby farm, like, taking care of all her animals and stuff like that. But she does have time like when it rains or at night or that kind of thing. So that's why she was comfortable taking me on, because I'm just like a couple extra hours a week. And then she'll do more projects for me in the winter when she has less farm work. So that's the great thing about like everything being so connected now through the internet, is that you can find someone like that on the internet too, where they might be overqualified, but they're living their dream in some other kind of way. So they'll be willing to work less because it just gives them something to do.
All right, she sounds overqualified to be farming too, but I don't know. I feel like I've known like several people that did that were like, enough of the engineering pressure, and I'm going to go start a lavender business, or what I mean, like start their own business, something they really enjoy rather than the high pressure job.
Yeah,
Right, and
yeah.
sorry, for people who are wondering, I mean, you don't have to tell us how much you're paying her or anything, but what could an author looking for an assistant expect to pay? It sounds like you kind of checked out a few different people first.
I think the low ball is like approximately $15 an hour, and then I think maybe hires about 25. I think you can obviously go higher, and then you'll probably then more get someone who is a professional assistant, and that's just what they do. But that being said, I know on the Creative Pen, she had a guest who specifically hires, I think it's Indonesian or Philippine. Like his company is based in the Philippines, and you can hire a full-time Philippine assistant for very, very, very cheap because in American dollars or the British pound transferred to the Philippine currency is way stronger. So there is that too.
Yeah, it'd be harder to go knock on their window if something went awry. All right.
That's true. Yeah, but they are hired through, like that guy specifically has a company, so you'd hire through the company. So then at least you have that backup. But yes, I agree. It is nice to deal with someone that I know personally.
Um, Last question. I'm sorry, everybody. I hope everybody else is interested too, or thinking one day I'm going to do this. But would you ever consider hiring like a fan? If somebody, I mean, do you feel it's important that the person has read all your books and like can answer those questions? Or I guess not, maybe not just asking to your general list, but if you've known somebody a couple years through interactions and you knew they were a big fan, do you think that'd be a possibility or something to consider?
I think so. My first editor actually who joined me, Jerry the Comic Queen, she actually read my stuff and then contacted me, was basically like, you have a good story, but you need help. So that was pretty much what happened with her, is that her daughters were fans. So I would definitely say I'd be open to hiring a fan. That's kind of like what the idea of beta readers and advanced reader copy teams are and all that kind of stuff.
All right, cool. Well, I hope everybody was interested in that and didn't mind that I asked you a half hour worth of questions just on personal assistance. But thank you for answering them. As I said, I really need to make that jump. Do you think, I feel like most of us make the jump too late. Do you feel that
Yes.
anybody ever does it too early? Like before, sometimes as indie authors, we have like these great a couple months when a book takes off or something, and you're like, I can hire all my friends, and then your income comes down. I've often thought like, well, it'd suck to have to let the person go later on.
Yeah, usually I think when you're to the point where you're ready to hire an assistant, you're pretty aware of the whole pits and ups and downs and stuff like that that you get as a writer. So I don't think I've ever really seen anybody have an issue with that. I do know I've seen like on the various forums and stuff like that where people perhaps quit their full-time job too early. But if you're cautious enough that you wait long enough for that and you feel like you're ready for an assistant and like you did already make the jump to full-time author and that kind of thing, then you probably can handle hiring an assistant at that point. And the good thing too is like if you are like contract on like an individual basis, then you can just tell them, okay, I need to bank off now for a couple of months because it's going to be lean, but then I'd like to hire you again when it goes back up, kind of thing.
All right, sounds good. So you mentioned that you've tried advertising this last year. So I think you said Amazon and Facebook ads, maybe. Could you tell us how that's went and if you learned anything, if it's if it's anything you're going to continue doing or if it was a bust?
Sure. So as another kind of like pre-thing is that I have to note that I have a very specific business model that I follow, and that is that my community is extremely strong. Going into the whole author thing, I had read a book about pop stars, and then I had watched YouTubers and kind of see how they cultivated their community. So they're super fans. I think there's a book out there called like 100 True Fans or something like that. So that's the entrepreneurial business model that I follow. So I took Mark Dawson's course, and the thing that he says works best on Facebook advertising is if you do like the lead magnet where you're giving away like a novella or a novel and then they sign up for the newsletter. I knew like when I started doing the Facebook advertising, I didn't want to do that because I didn't want to inflate my newsletter. I didn't want to add anybody who wasn't like a true blue loyal fan. So I didn't do that, which, like I said, that's the thing that I think almost always works basically. And instead, I just focused on trying to advertise books on Facebook, and it did not go well. I never managed to like even come out neutral, like at zero. But that being said, part of it is because if you look at what I write and then look at the big name authors who do fairy tale rewritings like Robin McKinley or Mercedes Lackey, which I'm not sure I'm saying her name right, they don't have a Facebook presence. So for my genre, that means that it's really hard to target ads, because really what it comes down to is you want to target people who have big Facebook followings and then go towards that audience. But since I didn't have that, it was much harder to target people who were really interested in that kind of thing. So I do know that the Facebook ads do work great for some genres, better than others. So that's probably why it failed for me. And if you're in a small niche, it probably isn't your best bet either. Um, Amazon ads were a lot more neutral. I didn't lose as much money. I had a couple of campaigns, I think that's what they're called, campaigns where they made a little bit, or at least where they came out zero. I didn't spend more than I made. However, they took so much time to put together, and you just have to babysit them and be continuously adjusting them. And that's where I figured, this isn't worth it. I don't enjoy it. I'd rather be writing, and that is a far better investment of my time. The last one I have done, last advertising I've paid for, is BookBubs. And I very specifically do the free BookBub ad. I don't do the 99¢. I only do the free ones. And then whenever I get a BookBub, I also, I do 4 days, and then I try to have a day or two before the BookBub ad, just to cover my butt, to make sure my stuff really does go free. But then also to kind of lean into it. And then after my BookBub ad, I still have a couple of days so I can put out the word on free websites and stuff like that, because there are a lot of websites where you can list your book for free at no cost. So the BookBub ends up creating a big spike, but then it's not quite so straight down the cliff, the following day, because you have those others. And both times they did the BookBub ads, they definitely repaid for themselves. Meg, the rock star assistant, said that she looked at them, and they both ended up being about as good as releasing a new book. So that was very nice. I did the BookBub on the first book in my Timeless Fairy Tale series, which is Beauty and the Beast, and then on the third book of my fairy tale series, which is Cinderella. The first book did get about 10,000 more downloads, and but it also, and so it got 28,000 downloads alone on the BookBub day. And then over the next month, it ended up getting, I think, 150 extra reviews. And I don't know how many subscribers. It was over 50 subscribers. Cinderella only got about 17,000 downloads, but it still got at least 50 new reviews, and it's gotten 60 new newsletter subscribers. And part of the reason I think why Cinderella didn't do as well is because it was book number 3, but my Timeless Fairy Tales are each standalone, so that's why I was able to get away doing it. I don't know if I would recommend that other people do that to their series, because it was kind of unusual. But as the added caveat too, it is a lot easier to get the free BookBub sections because all my books are KU, and I didn't have a problem getting in, versus I know normally they like to stay away from those.
Yeah, definitely. I've had a harder time getting BookBub to take the KU exclusive stuff lately. And I've had kind of similar experiences on the Facebook ads too, where space opera isn't a tiny niche, but I feel when I look for other authors that my stuff is that it becomes smaller, and it's hard for me to, find names to target. Same with the fantasy. I don't really like the big sprawling epic fantasies, and I couldn't even think of many people that I would target, and they were usually older authors. I'm oh, David Eddings, he's dead now, and it's been however many years since he published something, so probably not a hugely active Facebook page. And I pretty much just do Facebook ads around the launches now. The one genre I had good luck with just using keywords, not necessarily authors, but fantasy, blah, 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 was a fantasy romance I did with my pen name. So I feel like romance in general, if you have romance going on, that's a good readership target on Facebook. I think the sci-fi and fantasy people, and we've talked about this before, are pretty tech savvy in general, but when you go over to romance more, maybe some older folks or some less tech savvy people that aren't going to look at ads and go, ew, ads, or half of us have ad blockers, or I'm sure more than half of us, so don't even see them. So that's just my thoughts. You're not alone. I also don't care to do the free book to get signups. I've thought about it like doing a separate list that way, but not my main list, just because it is more work and it is more money eventually once you get above a certain amount. And if those people aren't buyers, proven buyers, it can be iffy if you actually want them.
Yeah, well, and when you might get like a huge newsletter list then. Like I've seen people who are like, "Oh, I have 10,000 newsletter subscribers," but then like when they do newsletter swaps, they also make you include your open rate, and usually it ends up being like less than 200 people actually open their newsletter, versus like I'll be honest, I only have a 2,000 newsletter subscriber list, but my open rate is like over 70%, and MailChimp is infamously bad at actually counting everyone. So that means it's over 70%. And so I'm really happy with that open rate. And to me, I'd rather keep that.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with that strategy at all, especially if you already have kind of got the ball rolling and you've got some fans. And, I think if you're starting from scratch right now, I would definitely consider giving away stuff to start a list. And you can always have a second list, like I was saying, with people who actually bought the book and then got the link to your mailing list.
Yeah, I actually use I'm on MailChimp right now, but I'm in the process of moving over to, oh goodness, I think it's called ConvertKit. Mm. It's a newsletter subscriber thing, but what happens is you tag people, so you can and you can create each individual form, and then that will like tag them. So I have a different form for each of my series, and then that way when the people subscribe through like the back end matter of my book, I know which book is the one that's actually bringing in the most newsletter subscribers. So if you were going to do that, then you could also tag like this is from like the newsletter sign up, like with the free book thing. Or I also try to do tags for like when I do events, that way I can know if it actually worked or not, because I can see if there are any new subscribers in that section.
Very smart. And if I was better at gathering data, if I had an engineer on my team, I would totally do that too. No, but that's an excellent idea to do the links so you actually know where they're coming from.
Yeah.
You mentioned doing, I think, a short story box set, and that you guys had done a Facebook Live event, and that it actually seemed useful. Could you tell us, maybe for anybody who hasn't done one before, like what that's about and how it actually helped sell some books?
Sure. So I was a part of the fairy tale box set, short story box set that Brian Cohen did, which I think it was like 16 of us authors, and it sold insanely well. Um, in the spirit of sharing, it actually didn't really move any books for me. I this was Meg was on board with me by then, and she was like, return on investment, blah blah blah. And we had just done a book bub the month before, and so she was like, the book bub was definitely more worth it because you actually got a spike, and you don't really see that with this box set coming out and da da da. So the box set itself didn't actually make a difference, but Brian organized us to do. We were in four writers per like 2 hour slot or something like that for this Facebook Live event that went on all day, and it was the first one I had ever done. And it was so much fun. The people that I signed up with, they were awesome. And I'm gonna mispronounce their names, but sorry guys if you're listening. It was Cameron, Jace, Aya Ling. Sorry if I said that wrong, and then Melanie Cellular. And it was really great to watch, specifically Cameron and Aya, because they've done stuff like this before. So they really kicked butt in the way they did it, and kind of then helped me realize how I wanted to do Facebook Live events in the future. So just as a little side caveat, I'd say if you can do it with other authors, it's a lot more fun because then you can talk to them. Don't do a Facebook Live event for over like 2 or 3 hours. I did an all-day one last week, and it was so tough just to keep the ball going and also just keep checking in all day long. So short is nice. An hour is kind of too short because if you're trying to interact with people, then you can really only make like 2 or 3 posts and still have time to like comment on questions and stuff like that. Usually now with Facebook Live events, I try to open with a video like this because it's a lot more personable, and then people get to see you, hear your voice, and kind of like they feel that you're more of a person and you're not like some greasy car salesman that's like, buy my books. So But through that specific Facebook Live event too, one of the things I learned is that it's really helpful, because I also looked back over the day and saw like what the other authors did. But it's really helpful if you have like a graphic set that's made beforehand. So you aren't just like, here's my book cover, buy please. So some people would have like pictures with quotes from their books. Now that I've done this, I have like, a picture of a castle with one of my quotes from my King Arthur series, and then I have like 2 of the covers on there. So it kind of acts more as like fun promotional images instead of just the book cover alone, because it makes you feel a lot more professional and a lot more like, yes, I do this as a living, like I take this seriously kind of thing. In terms of actually like seeing any kind of investment, Rockstar Meg is able to pinpoint stuff, and I could see it on my charts too. So, like I mentioned, I did a Facebook Live event last week, Friday, and I can see already that I had a spike then. I don't know what kind of tail it will have, but this is the kind of thing where it's best if you have a what is it called? Where you've got a lot more books than just like 2, a backlist, I think. It's better if you have a lot of books as opposed to just 1 or 2, particularly if you have like 2 or 3 completed series, or series in action, because then people will be able to keep moving, and you'll get more out of your time, I guess you could say.
Now, I've only done these as part of a group where, because I've been like, you have to do this. This is your 2-hour slot as we're releasing our box set. Have you done any on your own? Is that what you're saying? This one you did last week? And is it worth, it sounds like a lot of organization to do it all by yourself. Is it worth it?
Well, the one I did last week was actually for a book group, and it was a lot of fun. You're right, it can be a lot of organization, but there's stuff that you can do to make it easier. The Facebook Live events, almost always it's expected that you'll do a giveaway. I'm really lazy, and I don't like giveaways because I never win. So instead, I just put my first King Arthur book and my first Timeless Fairy Tale book for free, and then I just told everybody throughout the day, like, go get them, they're free, it's my giveaway to everybody, that kind of thing. So there's stuff like that, and once you have like your graphic set that I mentioned, like you're set for all of them, so that does limit it. The book group was closed, so I didn't invite any of my readers, which does set a different tone, because my people are, I don't want to say trained, but they know that I'll interact with them. So when we do Facebook Live events and I can invite them, like they bring the party, and it's crazy. And it's really nice though, because then they get everybody excited. So when we did that Facebook Live event with the multi-author box set, we had all been hanging out on my Facebook page, and then we made the jump to the live event, and they were just basically like, yeah, and like going through and liking up everything, and it just got everybody so much more excited. So it can be fun to do them alone. Like I probably would try and do it just with me, like, for an hour or 2 to celebrate like a brand new book launch. But that would be more like a celebration for me and my readers. I don't think I would randomly be like, I'm holding an event and like I'm going to try and advertise it. It's better if you have like some kind of a group attached to it, like what I did with the book group.
All right. And aside from maybe sending out a mailing list announcement or a Facebook page announcement, how are you getting people to actually come to these events? And because I assume like your readers already have all your books, so they don't care about your free book ones that you're giving away. So like, how do you entice them to come?
We like hanging out together. I mean, like if you look on my Facebook page, actually very little of what I write is about me, unless like it's like a new cover, or like I'm like, okay, this book's gonna come out in a month. But in general, my people are just, we're a community. We're a massive community, and yeah, they kind of see me as their leader, but they want to interact with me because they know that I want to interact with them and that I listen to them. And so like I'll do things like I'll post like, funny comics or like book memes or something like that. And then they'll respond, and I'll ask questions like, so for one of the book memes I did on a Friday, it was like, oh, when I said I'd stay up until I finished this chapter, I meant the last chapter. And so I was like, oh, who's done this? I did this last night. Oops. And then I got like lots of people who were talking about when they last did it. So if you really want people to like show up on the Facebook Live event, you have to make sure that it isn't just all about like me, 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 me. You want to make it a conversation, because that's really what you're trying to do too, is like converse with these people and convince them you want to read my book because I seem like a fun and interesting person, kind of thing.
All right, cool. Thanks for the information on that. Let me hand you to the guys. We'll try to get things wrapped up in the next, I guess we started late tonight, so I'm not sure how long it's been, but 10, 15 more minutes maybe.
Yep. Fortunately, some of my stuff has been covered, so we can probably go through this pretty quickly. When like talk about this a little bit, but like when you're putting together an event with other authors, what would you say is like the good minimum and maximum to really be able to effectively promote? Like you said, you would be willing to do one alone, but like, well, yeah, just minimum maximum for an event for optimal.
When you do them alone, it is nice because then it's just you, but it is definitely a bit of a fun sucker too. I'll be honest, the best Facebook Live event was the one I did with that box set, where Brian did all the heavy lifting in organizing it. I would say for minimum, like terms of hours, try to do at least a 2-hour shift. You can do one, but it just feels like once you finally get everybody on your pace, then you're like, bye, because the next people are coming. So I'd say shoot for 2. If you can do 3, maybe, but 2 really seems to be the optimum hour amount. Or maybe I should say do 2.5, because it'll take you half an hour to get everything up and running, and so you don't have issues like we did tonight. And then I don't think you want more than 4 authors talking at once, because then there's just too much going on the page and people can't keep up and that kind of thing. I think I've done it before where it's just 2 authors going at once. And like I said, it is nice to be doing it with someone, because then you can be talking to them over on the sidebar and kind of like timing your stuff. So that way you aren't like exhausting, like always on, always talking. So, but it definitely is up to personal preference too. Because if you just want to be alone because that's easier on you as a person. And like when I first started doing it, I was super nervous about being with the other authors because I am a super awkward introvert. So it was like, oh, this is going to be great. Now they get to know like what a weirdo I am. But it ended up being a lot of fun. So
Yeah, I was only ever part of one of these, and that was about I think we ended up doing groups of 3. So it seemed like it was a good fit, because anything, as you say, any more than that, we would have been stepping on each other.
yeah.
All right. So I only have one other question, and that is, and you were talking about how like you have worked very hard to have a very engaged fan base, and with some of these new things that you've been doing, like testing new advertising and doing the live events and joint promotions, have you found that any of those were particularly good at getting good dedicated fans, or were they not even really targeted toward that?
They weren't specifically targeted toward that. The BookBub ads actually did end up getting me some new readers. They worked quite well, actually. Like I didn't think they'd be quite as loyal as they were, but to be honest, part of that too was that they were like, "I read this free book and it was actually like well written. I'm so glad I got it." So then they became like true fans just because they were like, "Oh, that's actually good." But in general, my best bet at getting true fans is converting them right at the end of the book. If they really enjoyed it, I have a reader magnet, which is a starter pack. So it's actually a couple of short stories put together. And then when they come to my website, I more try to have extra information. Like I have a library of freebies. That really, that actually is probably the biggest thing that pulls them in, because at the end of each book, then I'll also have like, if you enjoyed this book, there's a free story or extra chapter or something like that on my website. And then usually once they come to my website, they're like, oh, look at all these free extra chapters. And look, like, because each book has its own page. And they're like, there's 3 posts that are about this book. Like, the first one, like if it's a fairy tale, I always have something that's like about the original legend and stuff like that. So it's not so much advertising is how I get those true fans, as much as I just kind of lure them in and then sink my claws into them, and it's like, we're best friends now, you're never leaving me, sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. The number of emails I have received, I have permafreeze, and the number of emails I've received that start with, I was really pleasantly surprised to find a free book that I'd read that was actually, I'm like, I don't know if maybe setting expectations super low and then exceeding them is the best way, but it certainly is very effective.
Yeah, it does work.
All right. So that's all I have for this section. I'll hand you off to Jeff for the last few questions.
Alrighty, yeah, see, we already took care of one of my questions there. Let's see, I have a question. With regards to joint author promos, do you prefer to be the organizer, or would you prefer to simply aid and assist and let someone else do the majority of the work? And I have a feeling I know the answer to this question.
Yes, never organize if you can avoid it. I will never organize. Like all the Facebook Live events that like I've been invited to, it's somebody else is inviting me and is doing like she's going to be here from this time to this time. Like if I'm just doing like a one with my fans, that's one thing because it's super easy. I just announce it on my page, like we're going to have fun, come join us, kind of thing. But for these actual events, I would never organize them. There's actually like a surprising amount of drama that goes into it. That was completely unexpected to me. I think mostly because I am an awkward person, so I don't interact with a lot of other authors. So, but I know when Brian was organizing the box set, he mentioned on the Sell More book show at one point that there was a little bit of drama, and I was just like taken aback because it's like, what is there to be dramatic about? But yeah, so if you can help it, never organize. But that being said, there are book groups out there who are looking for authors because it's a fun thing for them to do as groups. So you don't necessarily have to do it just as like a box set. You can also do it with like reader groups or like other like fan pages and that kind of thing. So kind of think outside the box maybe and ask, could I do a Facebook Live event? And then, like I said, have like a time slot. So that's easier to organize though, because then I guess you could say the pain of telling their group is on them. Like you aren't responsible for being like, hey guys, we're going to have an author from this time to this time. So.
Alrighty. Now, let's just say if a fairly new author is interested in getting involved in one of these promos, are there any red flags they should be on the lookout for?
I don't really know.
If someone says, "Would you be the organizer?" Would that be red flag number
Yes.
one?
Yes, that would be
Okay.
a red flag. Yeah. Although that being said, I don't really know that anybody would ask a newer author to organize them.
Yeah, probably not.
That's more of an experienced author person because it's like, who can we shove the work on? Who's like, gonna pull through these people? So that being said, this is like an aside thing. I should add that Brian, when he did this box set, it was actually his assistant who did a lot of the organization. I mean, he talked to all of us authors, but he said like behind the scenes, she was the one who did most of like the putting the box set together and stuff like that. So maybe make the author with an assistant do it. But yeah,
So subtly find out. Okay, who's got the personal assistant? Okay, you.
yeah, yeah. In terms of red flags, though, I don't really think so. Maybe, well, like I said, usually it's expected that you'll do some kind of giveaway for something like that. So maybe if they get really pushy with that and what they expect you to do, um,
We'll
but
need 20 signed
otherwise,
hard copies of your books and make sure you. Yeah, I
yeah.
get you.
Or if they want like to be paid, like I've never ever encountered anything like that with the Facebook Live groups, but I do get a lot of emails from like so-called marketing firms that are like, "Oh, we saw your book, and if you pay us one flat fee of $5.99, we'll be able to get you on all these like blogs and stuff like that." Don't do any of that. If they're cold casing you, they're not that good because otherwise they'd have people coming to them.
Right. Exactly right. All right. Well, that's it for my questions. Let me head you back over to Lindsay. We'll see if we can wrap this up for you.
Okay.
All right. Yeah. Thanks for staying late with us tonight. We appreciate it and all the good information, especially on hiring a personal assistant. Maybe by this time next year, I'll actually have done it. But is there anything you'd like to plug that you have coming out or just released, or just where can people find you? Any of that good stuff?
Well, if you want to come hang out with us, we're on KM Shay, and I say we're because I do mean my community. We hang out there, and then we also hang out on my Facebook page, which is author KM Shay. But yeah, my big thing was that I just finished my King Arthur series 2 months ago, and right now I'm actually more trying to, I guess you could say, create another entrepreneurial more like plan and try to figure out how I should pilot my next few books since the King Arthur series is over. So I don't really have any upcoming projects. But yeah, especially if you're a fairy tale writer, don't be shy. Come on, stop, leave like comments and on the Facebook page or anything because my people are always looking for something new to read.
All right, cool. I will put the links to your Facebook page and website in the show notes. This was episode 134. You guys can come on by marketingsff.com if you want to grab those links, or just go right to Kitty's page. It's totally fine too. We appreciate y'all listening, and thank you for all the good information tonight, Kitty.
Thank you. I hope I wasn't too long-winded.
Oh, nonsense.
Not at
You
all.
fit right in with us.
Yeah, but
Thanks
you
for hanging
actually
out
give
with us again.
information, so we like it when people give good information when they're talking.
I have like I feel like though like I'm like blah, 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 blah. Oh, and this might be useful. So blah blah blah. But
Well, no, that's good. And then anybody that was wondering about that gets that information, so it's awesome. And I guess that's it. Thanks for listening, everyone. Have a good day.
You guys take it easy.
Everybody.
bye.